Hello and welcome back to Prism and Company. On the docket today, we're continuing on the train of going through, clearly not this sentence, the entire tarot deck. We've talked so far about the wands, the cups, and the swords, and how I read all of the cards. And of course, up today is the discs. Now, I choose the word discs partially because I'm a Thoth head, and partially because I think pentacles is a little bit too confining, maybe. I like the idea of discs being just something physical, not necessarily money or wealth or anything, but just the physical world. And with that, I say let's dive right in and take a look at how that diskiness navigates into the... Boy, I was really trying to think of something that rhymed with disc. I'm not nailing these intros. But all that intro business aside, we've arrived at the discs, and I cannot believe it. It feels like it's been such a journey, and really it has, through the wands, through the cups, through the swords. And, I said it in the last video, the swords is my favorite suit, but if you sat me down with, say, like, the wands from a deck, and were like, Colin, this is going to be, like, the only suit you get for the rest of your life, I would get around to the point where I'd be like, the wands is actually like my favorite suit. Like, I say the swords to be edgy, but like the wands is really where it's at. And then someone brings over the cups and I'm like, oh, well, actually, like the cups. The reason I say all this is that the discs, I think you'll know where I'm going with this, is like my super double secret favorite suit because it's so earthy. All the other suits are kind of wrapped up in their own head in some way. They're like very intangible and ephemeral, and they're making this hand motion, and the discs are just like, nah, I'm gonna just chill here, and it kind of sounds lovely. I like that grounded, approachable, I always say it, crunchiness of the discs. It's where we live. We all think and we all have emotions and we all have passions, but this is the day-to-day. This is the stuff that we touch and feel and smell. It's the senses. And I think that's really cool. I haven't even begun to talk about the ace though, so we should probably do that. Our ace of discs comes from the Masonic Tarot. And I've just gone on about this deck too much, but not too much. Maybe even not enough. I haven't even talked about every card. What am I saying? But the reason I like the Masonic Tarot so much is that there's all this little accoutrement around the side. Here we have, say, the fire symbol and the water symbol, but their color associations have been switched. So we have a red downward pointing arrow and a blue upward pointing arrow. Just lots of weird little stuff. And here we have this skull cracking open and almost like the idea of matter like springing forth. I think it's kind of a cool bridge coming from the swords and having a very like heady, thoughtful suit, but then having it be extremely grounded in reality and earth with actual bone. And then from that comes like this blueprint that emerges out. And then finally the coin. We have the very physical object that manifests. And I read the Ace of Coins like a blueprint. If the aces are all about kind of this expansion and, nothing solidified yet. Something that is inherently solid that is not solidified, to me, is the plans for something solid. So I'm digging the kind of blueprinty vibes in this as well. Beautiful image. We get a lot of little hints towards what's to come, like a cube, again, reminding us to be nice and solid. And there's also a sun and a moon on the top, which is kind of an interesting duality too, of like, the earth and the physicality of things are like all of a sudden being affected, where the sun and the moon might mean something a little bit more esoteric and like woo-woo. And say like the swords, the sun could be like your conscious and your subconscious is the moon. Now it's like, no, like the sun is going to grow the plants that you're going to eat at night when you're sleeping. And there's probably more cool esoteric wisdom built into this deck, but I like that you can read it as just very grounded and earthy. Okay, I think I'm just gonna call the ace here, and let's take a look at the two, because I think we sort of need to. Quite frankly, I think we need to. Let's do it. All right, here we got the two from the Handel Tarot, and if you have watched my channel since its long storied history of like 2.5 weeks ago. This card has featured many times in many videos because it's dope. Have we looked at the card yet? I think we're looking at it. I just want to give you like the blurry abstract version of like what this card is. This is what I want. Even like just out of focus, just the composition of it has so much movement and rhythm and undulation. It's great. It's like just a totally wild, off the wall approach to how you might depict a tarot card in general, with like these crazy, like confetti ribbons all over the place. But also the Two of Pentacles. We have this very, see, I said pentacles after I went on in the intro about how I'm going to call them discs. But in this very like down to earth grounded suit, now it's like, no, let's put like streamers on everything and throw a party. Although I don't necessarily read this that way. I kind of like the word harmony for the Two of I did it again. The Two of Discs. Listen, these little spheres of rock or coin or metal or whatever are called like 150,000 things, and I'm over it. I'm gonna call them stone spheres from now on. So the suit of stone spheres. I like to think of this card a lot as just plain up and down change. It's a very Thothi interpretation, but you often see a infinity symbol, which has a cool name that starts with an L that I'm blanking on right now. But like these two stone spheres here could be the gears turning a belt wound between them. So the idea that, if you are doing something, it's eventually going to wrap around to something else. It's going to change. It's going to move. We had the blueprint in our ace, the idea of solidity, and now things are finally becoming manifest in some way and, coming into being, but it's so new and there's not any like set patterns yet that it just has to be constantly ebbing and flowing and oscillating and changing just to sort of see what works. Even the idea of maybe like a planet forming, like you have a supernova and it blows all this cosmic material out into space, and then eventually two atoms come together which attract a couple more atoms, and then gravity begins to form which brings stuff in, and then you have this like undulating mass of lava which cools, but then a crater smashes into it. There's creation, but it's volatile. It's always changing. And it usually comes up more mundane in an actual tarot reading. Something the idea of just changing literally what you're doing, or something physically changing in your life. But I kind of like thinking of tarot on a more esoteric cosmic scale, just because I think it makes for more interesting stories, quite frankly. But that's usually where I put the two. Undulating, changing, oscillating. This, more than any other two in the deck, feels like the numerological associations with two, which are often duality or change or a choice. That is really in the discs for me. Like that is where that settles in, because twos in the other suits, and also here, but mostly in the other suits, were just like their suit trying to find their way, just getting out, and it's the very first thing that they do. And the first thing that the discs do for me is change. Okay, let's take a look at the three. I love the Three of Pentacles. It's like my fairy godmother card. This card is like, you better work. And I am looking at this card now through my viewfinder. I picked the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot. And what in the hell did I pick this card for? Like, this deck is so wild. It just blows my mind. There are many lovely depictions of the Three of Pentacles. And looking at this one now, I'm like, why did I pick this one? But I do like the very active, hands-on approach to building here. She's literally carving a statue with her hands. Now, in many decks, this three is depicted as community, or like people coming together to work. I don't necessarily read that. I read the three as, we have all of this oscillating change, but now it's time for that slow growth that we've been talking about. And for a physical suit, that means that you got to kind of put your nose to the grindstone and work and do. And that could certainly happen in community, in a construction company, let's say. But that could also happen alone with, just working on a project by yourself. And that idea of slowly chipping away at something, taking a much more calculated approach as opposed to the very wild, oscillating approach of the two, is really where this card kind of finds its distinction. Looking at the actual image itself, it's a little bit odd. I mostly want to talk about it because it's weird. We have a stone statue being carved, but it's not actually sitting on anything. It is currently floating in the water, maybe on some starfish that are supporting it. Like, the physics of that is confusing to me. And then there's also light shining from behind it. Stone is not typically a luminescent material. I only nitpick this deck because I find it so weird and charming, and I love it. I'm just like, Dame Darcy, where's your statue? Like, what is it sitting on? I mean, maybe there's like darker color down here, so that's like a trench or something, but like, I don't know. I love it though. I think this is great. I think the idea of slow building is really beautifully rendered here. And I think let's slowly work our way to the 4, or actually quickly. Oh, a classic interpretation of the 4. We return once again to the Thoth. Here we see a fortress mighty and strong, surrounded on all sides by a moat. Outside of the moat, outside of the protection of the kingdom, we see a field and farm where things are growing. The 3, if you will, the slow growth of spring and summer. But now that has been confined into a space. As we have said before, the 4s are stable, but also confining. And what better imagery to use than that of brick and stone? Boy, I went on with that a little bit longer than I expected, but all that stuff is true. Here we can see that very kind of confined, restrained feeling. And I see all sorts of different interpretations of the 4 of discs, pentacles, stone spheres, often as like hoarding money or saving money. But for me, it's just kind of the idea of like structured physicality, and physicality that's like built to last, literally almost like a stone castle, something that is going to sustain itself. And that could be a situation that you're in, like this would be just a very stable situation, or it could be financially stable in some ways. I don't read a lot of context into how they're being stable. I would almost look for like the position in a spread or other cards alongside of it to determine, are they being stable because of being frugal? Are they being stable because of being greedy, or because of their smart financial decisions, or because they're literally fortifying themselves? Fortifying? Fortnighting? Is that what Fortnite is? I'm just kidding. Oh my God. I can't believe I went there. In like a stone structure, man, I say so much stupid stuff that I edit out, but I think I might just leave this one in. So yes, again, like the context of what's around this is really what I would kind of read into how this is being stable. I'm really just more interested in the idea of stability here. This is kind of interesting, and something I hadn't realized, that the suit of discs is very much like almost the literal interpretation of some of these numerological values for me. 4s are often read as stable, which in our other suits has kind of had like all of this veneer thrown over the top of it. Stable, but, and here it's like, no, it's just stable. The 3 was like, nah, it's just like work. And the 2 was like, nah, it's change. And I'd be curious to see if that kind of continues through. I'm glancing at the 5 and already I'm like, maybe not. But we'll kind of see once I start talking about it. I think I mentioned this was from the Thoth. The voice threw me off. I forgot all the details that I said. This really is, I think, a very stunning depiction of the 4 of discs, though. And, like, they're not discs, they're squares or cubes. So, like, that's also wild and super cool. And I love that. And with that, I say let's move on to the 5s, and hopefully no more Fortnite jokes. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I broke my rule again, and I did 2 Thoth cards in a row. Man, I was really trying to kind of switch up the decks that I used for every single card, but sometimes the cards just speak correctly. This is the 5 of discs from the Thoth, as I mentioned, and it's not so much that I'm like madly in love with this depiction, it's just that a lot of depictions of the 5 are like a little bit like, I don't know, a little bit much for me. They're like folks with like crutches outside of churches, or like weeping people. It's just like, okay, we get it. We can, be a little more abstract about these concepts, because who knows what we're reading about. If it's like a relationship spread and you're like, how's it going to go? And you draw the 5 of Pentacles and it's like, oh, you're going to get your leg broke and she's going to steal all your money. Like, probably not, but that visually like says what those are. Those, why can I not get the sentence out? We've officially reached the point in the tarot walkthrough where I have just devolved into nothingness. And a little behind the scenes, I'm not filming this in one day. This is like days later from the first one. So I have no excuse for why I'm not. Is that a fuzz? No, that's on my iPad. Okay. We're going to bring it right on back. The 5 for me, let's talk about the card, Colin, is all about not financial instability, but like situational instability. I love these big solid discs that are cracking around the seams, kind of letting lava or something in. And it's not so much about the fact that it's cracking, like these objects are still very solid in there, but it's more about like the impendingness of that. If you think about 5s as disruption, which we have been, and disrupting something that was stable. So we're coming from that very, very stable 4 of discs to now the 5. Even the creeping thought of instability is enough to just like throw off a stable situation. And because it is such a earthy, grounded suit, you could also take this as just potentially, like I said, like financial instability, or something in your life being thrown off in a way that you weren't expecting. Anything with that kind of cracking the foundation, cracking at the seams, that's really what I read here. And for me anyway, there's a card that is significantly more like low or heavy than this one in the 5s. So this one to me is not like out in the cold, like say the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. That is another one for me. So this is more about that cracking, that instability, that unsuredness, really just starting to take hold. So let's take a look at where the 6 takes us. And we're back to the Masonic Tarot. With the 6, how lovely. Here we can see our blueprint from that ace has been put into place, and we have some discs happening. We also have the return of our moon and our sun on top, but also in the center here. And again, this whole time, 6s have all been about rising, and we literally have arrows pointing us up in this card. This card has a very vertical feel to it, even with this sun almost rising out of the crescent of the moon. So everything is kind of starting to go up. So we were very worried in the last card. There was impending doom, there was cracks of the foundation, and now we're taking that information, those cracks, but overcoming it. We are, it's the sunrise, and the sunrise is just the beginning of the day, so the day could go to crap, but for now it's great, and we're gaining something. In context, I like to think of this card as maybe a small business who has been grinding for like 2 years and making it paycheck to paycheck, barely making any profit. This is the moment where they get the big windfall. They finally make the money. They finally have a really successful quarter or week or whatever, and it doesn't secure their financial situation forever, but it's a boost. And similar to that, it's the idea of just like almost short gains, but really powerful, inspiring short gains. I love all the 6s. I've said it in the previous videos for this, just because of, I see them as so like give and take. They're really good and they're really hopeful, but they're like shallow. If you don't maintain it, it could just fall apart. And I said it in one of the previous videos too, but for me, these cards tend to fall down to their even or odd counterparts. So like the 6 would fall down into the 4. You make a bunch of money, you're feeling good, and then immediately you like hole up and be stable. you're like, nope, we're not going to do it. We're not going to take any more risks. We got there. Man the hatches. Insert metaphor here. Like, defend the perimeter. That's what I was looking for. We want to be stable. We want to be secure. And I think this is so cool. Like, this is a very nice little compact, beautiful description of how this card reads for me. I mentioned this in my top 5 faves video, that this is a really bad reader for me. I'm curious, now that I am more experienced, because I got this deck fairly early, I should go back to it, because I'm looking at my stack and I have a lot of Masonic Tarot cards as like the archetypal way I read tarot. So I think this could be pretty cool. I'm actually very excited about that. Maybe I'll do a video. We'll see. With this, let's take this momentum, this windfall that we've gotten, and see where it leads us in the 7. It's not great. All right, and here we are with the 7. This 7 of discs comes from the absolutely lovely La Corte de Tarocchi. I just want to pet this paper every time I draw it out. Oh, and it keeps wanting to turn. Now, the 7 of discs for me is a really interesting card because I read this very different than a lot of folks who read a more Rider-Waite-Smith style. And it's a much more Thothi interpretation, so it's not like wholly unique to me. None of this really is. This is just my conglomerated, tarot info. But for me, this card is all about working really hard but getting no gains. And a lot of folks read this as reaping what you've earned from, a lot of hard work. So almost opposite in some ways. And that's just one of those things that always gets me of like, do I actually read tarot right? Like, am I totally missing the boat here? And if I'm misinterpreting how a lot of folks read the 7, I'd be really curious to hear that too. But for me here, 7s are all about missing the mark coming off of the 6. You have the 6 rising, and what could go wrong? Like, this is almost a cautionary card. The 7s feel very interference-y and caution-y in some ways. So we have the idea of, we have these gains from the 6. This might be a poor investment of those gains. Like, you spend a lot of money unnecessarily and do all this extra stuff, but don't actually reap any benefits from it because you're just thinking quick, short term, make more cash, and not all of that hard work that went into making the money from the 6. And I'm using money here as just an easy example, but again, any sort of like physical situation. I also, in this case, read the 7 of discs as being very old. I like the idea that this is aged equipment in some ways. It has, maybe was pristine at one point, but it's just sat around too long. The interference here being just like the interference of time or new technology or other ideas, and it just hasn't gotten put to work, and so it is rusted and old and stained. And I think that idea of, either putting in a lot of work or a lot of time, like just throwing a lot at the 7 and then just not getting what you expect out of it. I find that really interesting. And then to me, that also gives the 7 a more unique flavor because, and I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about reading Waite-Smith, but to me, a lot of the discs feel the same from how I've heard people describe them, especially like the 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, there's some blurring that happens to me there, but that could 100% just be my lack of digging into that system. That is all aside because that's not really what I'm talking about here. I just thought it was kind of an interesting little bit. As far as the image itself here goes, I picked this one partially because it's a pip deck, because many, many decks depict this the other way that I was talking about, fruitfulness, bounty, and those types of things, which is a really hard one for me to sort of explain away in a tarot reading. Something like the 3 of Swords, where you have the swords stabbing through a heart, I can roll with that. It's not the perfect depiction in my opinion, but you can roll with that. If I read the 7 of discs as hard work with no gains, and there's a picture of somebody harvesting a ton of stuff though, I am a pretty crafty storyteller. I can't think of a way to do that and have yet to think of a way to do that. So whenever I do a tarot reading, I'm just like, please please don't draw the 7 of discs. Please don't draw the 7. I just don't want to have to explain why it's not the good thing that it's showing. And not that it's bad, it's just not, in my way of reading, it's not the thing it's showing. Another reason designing a tarot deck was so much fun. I got to draw crappy, rusty discs, and it was all red, and it's very intense. But yeah, I would think with that, let's take a look at some of the other options that can come off the 6 with the 8. The 8s in all the suits so far have been getting cut short. In the wands, it was like fireworks, energy spewing off but not being able to sustain so much, just like too many wild little pops here and there. With the 8 of cups, it was emotion not having a chance to really develop. It was getting cut off and becoming stagnant. With the 7, the 8 of swords, I thought the letter S in my mind went 7. The 8 of swords was our thoughts, getting interfered with each other and kind of cutting themselves off. So with the 8 of pentacles here, or discs, from the Albano weight in this case, we have that idea of again, too many individual little details or too many things taking away from the big whole. So we have a person here who is carving an individual thing, focusing too much on that and not enough on the big picture, really seeing the trees and not the forest. This idea of slow, prudent work, almost like the 3, but really kind of narrowing in and maybe missing the big picture. And now it's not all bad. That was kind of a negative spin on saying that, but there's also a lot of craft that goes into this card too. A lot of, elegance and refinement, and the idea that if you do spend all this time on a single thing, even if it's kind of missing the point, that thing is going to be really great. And I like that, especially the active suits and the passive suits. And when I say that, I mean active as fire and wind, so our wands and swords, and passive as cups and discs. You can also think of active as lines, so we have a literal wand and a literal sword, and passive as being circles. So instead of moving, they're kind of staying the same. So we have the top of a cup or a pentacle or a disc. They feel very different. The way that they interpret all the different numbers feels different. So the 8 of discs and cups feels a lot more similar to me, and then the 8 of wands and swords feels a lot more similar to me. They're pairs almost in that way. So this card is generally positive in the way that I read it. Even though I think it came off a little bit more negative, it's just too focused. This is a cautionary card in some ways. I feel like a lot of our 8s have been kind of cautionary, and just a card to be hey, nothing's bad, but, think about this kind of thing. Cool. Let's take a look at our 9. The 9, coming in from the Ancient Italian Tarot, the only card from the Ancient Italian Tarot that has made it into my Franken deck, which in some ways got me thinking about, do I actually want to keep this deck? But it is a pip deck, and pip decks are not designed to be specific, they are designed to be broad. And there's probably a Marseille person out there screaming at me no, there's so much cool specificity. My apologies, I do not know it. But the idea of just having 8 coins, 9 coins, 10 coins, you can read pretty much whatever you want into this image because it's not actively trying to depict a thing, it's just trying to present a number in a specific way. Now, the reason I do like this number depicted in this way is that it's literally 9 coins on this card. And for me, 9s are all about gains with the suit of pentacles. So this is the card where you just get that money. I mentioned before how some of the discs in other systems feel a little bit similar to me. This is the card that really, for me anyway, speaks to yes, we're getting there. If you think about the 9 of cups, the disc's kind of sister suit, that card was all about just emotion growing and being present. It was just happiness or joy or whatever it was. It was just a lot of it. If you think of a lot of earth coming at you, that's probably gaining in some way, whether it's gaining financially or a new job or place or business or whatever it might be. Just unadulterated gains not any of the stigma or not stigma, like conditions of the six where you really had to work for it and like be careful. This one doesn't feel that way to me. This is really just about gaining and growing and having. I think that's pretty cool. I like that there's some cards in the deck that are just not the most like esoterically deep. They're just kind of there to be a part of life. And sometimes you just get stuff, and that's pretty cool. I think I might even leave this one all just to that. Let's take a look at where things end up in the 10. To kind of craft our narrative a little bit more here, the 6 is really kind of a turning point in the suit of discs for me. We had that like little gain, but it was like temporary or needed some work. And then the 7 and the 8 were different outcomes of what could happen from that. Either, putting too much into something that wasn't going to go. And so we have this hold up or this like stalemate kind of, or going to the 8 where you're focusing too hard on something and you can put a lot of detail and attention to it, but you might miss the forest for the trees. But like if you put work in, you're going to get something out of it. So that's where the 9 comes in, and you just finally you get past that and you start to work and make it. And then the 10 here is you have established yourself. We have completed our suit, just like the other 10s complete what they want to do. And what does the suit of Pentacles want to do? It wants to, again, create more earth. It wants to establish even further. So that is spreading its oats. On the 10 of Pentacles in, say, the classic Waite Smith deck, you see generations of people. An old man, a woman standing, I think it's like a father and mother in there somewhere, and then kids. So this idea of passing down from generation to generation. And I think that's really cool. It is beautifully depicted here in the Thoth deck. We have all these different signs of Mercury, I believe. Oh boy, I should have looked that up, but these are definitely symbols of Mercury on top. And the idea here is that this is the tree of life, and there's a lot going into the tree of life and how that is kind of emanating creation down from the very ethereal Kether through all the Sephiroth down to Malkuth. But that all aside, we have finally arrived in our physical plane. Everything has settled. The dust has settled. It's compressed into what we now see as reality. And then you can take that seed essentially and turn this into our new Kether in some ways and like start the process again. So it's this idea of taking the finalized form, the great work, if you will, if you want to think of this alchemically, and beginning anew, because life is cycles. It doesn't just go and end and stop. Even if a comet hits the Earth tomorrow and we all die and everything dies, the universe doesn't stop. Quantum mechanics still continues its grind and its ebb and flow. And this card is a perfect example of that. Whatever is ending is just the start of something new. I was going to sing a little bit of closing time there, but I think we can all sort of live without that one. If you have not read Lon Milo DuQuette's book on understanding the Thoth deck, boy, I cannot recommend it enough. He does a really incredible job of breaking down what this card is. And the Book of Thoth from Crowley himself, boy, it's a really hard hitter if you are a little more steeped in kind of esoteric speak, specifically around the Tree of Life. It's a very, very cool, powerful passage from that book, one that is a real favorite of mine. In the actual image itself, we're seeing all of these coins laid out, and it almost looks like there's some stacks of coins behind there too. And then behind this, there are just coins falling. We can see the edges of some coins on the sides. We, of course, see the faces of many coins, and it almost looks like they're suspended in liquid or something. They're just like, I imagine like falling in slow motion, like someone's making it hail back there. And we're just, seeing a moment where all of these coins or discs line up and catch the light just right to illuminate some kind of cool esoteric truth. This is kind of neat. We've gone from literal blueprint to completing the alchemical work, or just being so stable that you can start a new project. A really cool journey through the Pentacles, that was really down to earth. I mean, except for this one. This one got a little bit heady. But I just love that about the discs. And I think I've said pentacles probably as much as I've said discs. And here we are at the 10. But I'm going to wipe that all away. I'm going to take all that I've learned through calling this the wrong thing the whole time and start anew with the court cards. All right. No surprise to anybody if you have been watching these videos so far. We have the Princess of Discs. Boy, it is hard to see these and not say Sister of Earth. From the Tarot of the Spirit, because the court cards in this deck are just ridiculous. Here we can see this gal who looks very at peace. Oh, can I pick this up? There we go. Just like eyes closed, very soft and soothing expression. And it's almost like she is holding, or maybe this is within her, like this glowing sphere. The court cards for me are all about elemental overlays. So princesses in this case, or pages, are the earthy part of whatever suit we're looking at. And here we're looking at the suit of earth with the discs. So the earthy part of earth, the earthiest earth that ever earthed an earth. And this card is, for me, all about the 10, but very, very specifically focused on that like point of starting over. And that's a very Thothi interpretation of how this works. Crowley calls this card the nadir of transfiguration, I believe, something along that line. The idea that on our tree of life, in our journey, in our cosmic understanding, this is as low as you can possibly go. This is the earthiest earth. This is, sinking into the soil and dissolving into it. But if we apply the chemical idea, not the alchemical, alchemical or esoteric idea of as above, so below, the thing that is the very lowest will also be the very highest. So this is the point in the tarot deck where things revert. Things finally go back to that zero, the Fool. We've gone all the way from the beginning of the deck now to the end of the deck, which is kind of interesting because many decks will put the page or the princess first in the court cards, and then they will end with the King of Pentacles. But if we think about this from just an elemental standpoint, the earthy part of earth is the furthest that you could get away from the Fool, which is the elemental air trump within the trumps. And also zero, the idea of nothingness, of infinity of points. And we'll get into the court cards of, I keep saying court cards, the major cards next time. But this one is the opposite of that. So that's where we're going to land here. Again, one of my classic core descriptions of a card that would be very difficult to actually read into a situation or read into a tarot reading. But that's the life that I leave. Be jealous of it. I think with that, let's move on to the night. This is just one of those videos that I'm making where I'm like, who's watching this? Like, if you made it past the 5, I think, and the Fortnite joke, like, bravo to you. I didn't make it past that, clearly, because it's just evolved from there. Here we arrive at our Knight of Discs. Now, this is the Thoth deck, so this would be the Prince of Discs in that set. And here we have the airy part of Earth. So the part of Earth that is moving and spreading and blowing. I literally think of seeds wafting in the breeze, of pollination, of things kind of moving and spreading. This is, maybe an idea moving or spreading across country, like a business on the go, or a business on the go. It's a city of industry, or, kind of wealth maybe moving or transferring. Anytime I dive into like, what does this card really mean? I just don't do great because that's not where my head goes. My head always goes to the more structural, esoteric side of things. And then I just want to talk about the pictures because they're so pretty. Here in this card, speaking of, we have our knight on like the craziest strongest, slowest looking chariot or vehicle that I've ever seen. Like this bull, sorry, dude, because you got to haul all of this stuff. And I think Crowley talks about these as being like cosmic orbs, but I just see like a seed bank. Like this dude is ready to like be a farmer at any moment. He's got kind of the world in his hands, and behind him even it almost looks like plant growth in some ways, and it's just radiating off of him. You can see these radial lines kind of pulsing and ebbing, and I'm getting that idea of like it's slow moving, it's earthy, but it's this pulse that's coming off of it. It's this spreading and pollination and movement that's really changing things. We can see a lot more of that down here too, and it's really pretty. And for me, I also get the idea of looking at maybe like rows of corn, but from a distorted lens, almost like we're seeing a panorama, like a 360 panorama of a cornfield with our knight in the center of it. And we're just getting a very abstracted view of it, which fits right in with how Lady Frida Harris does her artwork. It's all about projective geometry and odd spaces and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually what she was going for, although I do not know. Yeah, I say with this one, let's call it like that. You know, it's a fairly straightforward idea, and take a peek at what the Queen has to offer. Here we have the Queen of Pentacles, or discs, from the Albano weight deck, our classic weightsmith deck. A really beautiful interpretation. In the card itself, we see our queen on a beautiful throne, but that throne is kind of carved with life and flowers. And then, of course, all around her, life is just blooming and it's everywhere. Our queens, of course, are the watery part of our suit, and the pentacles or discs are earth, so the watery part of earth. And in the background here, we can see some rivers irrigating this field. And I really read that kind of irrigation or that fertility as what this is. Now the the Empress from the Major Arcana is very often associated with the keyword or the idea of fertility, but we'll get there too. This one to me though is very much just like taking the knight, what he was doing, spreading those seeds and raining on them, literally applying water and making things grow. More than any other card that we've seen so far, this card is a real engine of just making stuff happen. How do you get the Three of Discs to work? You apply the Queen of Pentacles. You apply that fertility, that nurturing, fertile ground. This is spreading mushroom compote on the flowers to make them bloom better. I think that's pretty cool. I just love this image just because of that like new budding feel to it, because she is surrounded by all this stuff, but we have dirt, around the river. We have grass poking up, but it's not there yet. And even this little bunny kind of coming in to eat all the new growth and, I don't know, probably prevent it from growing more. I even like that the veil around her head here kind of speaks almost to a river. So if we think of her red dress and the red seat behind her as like earth and stone, this her veil on her is irrigating even the throne that she is sitting on. Super neat. Really like this one. Again, like our court cards in the discs, not a ton of stuff going on. So let's take a peek at what the knight has to offer. And I don't even mean to say not a lot going on. They're just straightforward. They are what they are. There's not a lot of esotericism, which I don't think is a word, but it's not here even if it was a word. Here we have our King of Discs from the Thoth deck, called the Knight of Discs in this deck. And now we have the fiery part of Earth, the part of Earth that is very active and changing and moving. And in his shield, you can see, again, those sound waves coming off, kind of like we did, not kind of, almost nearly like we did in the Knight. But this, to me, almost feels like a bell ringing. It is disrupting visually what's happening in the background. It's no longer a distorted view of a field. This is literally air changing and moving. Because for me, the Knight is very much like an earthquake. That idea of like a strong impulse, an immovable something, a mountain that like seizes and splits in half, big, unstoppable change. The King of Discs, hashtag big unstoppable change. I think this is a very clever depiction of this card for many reasons, but my favorite part of this is that our king is looking off at where these airwaves are going, at where he just rang his bell off into this mountain to kind of like new things. But his horse, his means of transportation, or even his throne in some cases, in some decks, is looking at the ground. It's not going anywhere. So it's powerful. It is, strong. This dude has like the body language of someone who's about to like kick butt and take names and steal some identities. But this horse is like, nah, I'm actually going to just like sit here and eat. So if you think of that like an earthquake, it is strong and sudden and like disruptive and damaging in some ways, but it's not fast. It's not like it's going to go anywhere. Like an earthquake happens and is stable. It is like a tsunami washes over something. An earthquake does this and just decimates. It doesn't have to move a lot because this like is the earth itself. The earth itself is taking action, and because it is so primordial and mighty, it doesn't have to take a lot of action for it to be devastating. So cool, a very cool, like almost boomerang of an image of a composition. Really, really nicely done. Holy cow. I've been talking this whole time and not realizing that this is our last card of the discs. It almost makes me sad. I had so much fun talking about them. Boy, again, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it. This one really got off the rails, but I like it when things get off the rails because, I don't know, the rails are fine, but they're like, okay, I don't even know. I was going to make some dumb joke about rails, but that in and of itself would go off the rails. I think it's time that we go on to the major arcana. Da 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 da. Well, next time. See ya.